I would like to say, I'm just getting out the gate, Matt. I'm not gonna play around with it. I think I think Cold Hands is Sir Dunk the Tall. Okay,
Agreed.
that's my first assertion. My second assertion is that George is giving us the description of the hand being black and cold as ice, and then calling him Cold Hands, and the idea that, oh, it's been frostbitten to its decay. But I told you I don't agree with that. I actually think Sir Dunk the Tall's hands were burned. I think they were burned at Summerhall, and that is why his hand is black. It just so happens to look like it would be frostbitten. It's kind of a cool little play on the elements there. And then the other thing is that 100%, I think that this kind of points to the idea that Cold Hands and Bloodraven are working together. We know Cold Hands says a friend, right? Like there's a friendship there. We know Bloodraven and Dunk had a relationship at one point in the series. All the while, Dunk and Egg novellas are being written about at this time. Dunk's a massive human being. Him riding an elk would definitely work. So for me personally, I think he's Dunk the Tall.
Yeah, I 100% agree. We've talked about this at length many times. We did a Night of the Seven Kingdoms breakdown, right? We did a iceberg, and that was one of our theories on there. You can check that out on that iceberg theory. And I was thinking a little bit more about Cold Hands, obviously, as we're reading this chapter and we go into it. And one of the things that you and I don't think we've really discussed, and I don't see a lot of other people discuss, is like the nature of Cold Hands, right? Because it's always like, is it Benjen? It's always like anytime you see a lot of discussions online or view videos, it always comes down to, who is he? Who is Cold Hands is the question. But I think there's a kind of more interesting theory when it comes to Cold Hands, and more like, what is he? Because even if you look at the show version, it's Benjen, and he's clearly saved by the Children of the Forest, Bloodraven, we don't know. And then he shows up and saves Jon, and Jon's like, Benjen, and then he dies. And that's it.
Well, I jettisoned it from my brain once George had his note to his editor said it's not Benjen. I just jettisoned it from my brain. I'm like, okay.
But let's even take that it's Duncan the Tall as an example. So obviously, the theory, I think, for that is that Duncan gets burned at Summerhall. He goes to Castle Black because who knows? Maybe it's a prophetic thing of Bloodraven calling to him. I mean, clearly something happens here with all these ravens. And I don't know that it's exactly just Cold Hands doing this. It's probably Brennan Rivers, Bloodraven. Could be future Bran.
Could be Bran. Yeah.
Could be future Bran. And that's kind of something else we talked about, is like time and how it works in that Patreon theory we just did. But you look at this and he's almost like a white, but he's not exactly a white.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's something that's kind of interesting, because he clearly has, like, he's sentient. He can talk, he can think, even if it ends up being Benjen or, whatever. He clearly is his own person, as opposed to like the whites that we see that the Night King controls, although there isn't a Night King in the books. I mean, there's the Night's King, but there's not, like we see in the show, that like one White Walker figure.
Big baddie.
Totally different. Yeah, there are White Walkers, but So what's kind of different is, if like the Children of the Forest did create the White Walkers, and then like the White Walkers create the whites, is this something that's kind of different? Is Cold Hands kind of different because he seems to have intelligence, he can talk, as opposed to just being like a nice zombie? Or is it more of like the nature of who creates you? Whereas like the White Walkers just want an army of the dead, as opposed to maybe the Children of the Forest need agents. But why aren't there more of them is another question. Was it some sort of like ceremony? Like the books, and then you go back to that. We talked about this in some of our World of Ice and Fire stuff. You go back to any of that. You and I have talked about more of the idea that the White Walkers in the books appear to be their own thing, like their own species that has existed well before, like just in like separate to the Children of the Forest. The show shows us that they created them. Mm-hmm. So maybe it was like an imperfect magic, because it is possible that the Children of the Forest could still have created them as a response to the invasion of the Andals and everything. So like that could still happen, and we might learn about that in Winds of Winter. So if that is the case, then maybe this is more what they were trying to do, and they've perfected it now. And maybe the White Walkers themselves, maybe it was the first time they tried it. And if it does go something like the show, then that could be the case there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say without the context of if there is a
Who it
driving,
is.
who it is, right? Like that's the hardest point to go with. But one thing we do know in the book, right? And I kind of want to point to this is that Bloodraven, Three-Eyed Crow, whatever, is a true entity in the world that controls things, right? That is attempting
100%.
to control things. So here's a
Happens
question.
right here in this chapter.
Here's a question. Is Coldhands just some random dead ranger that is being warged into by Bloodraven?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Like, is he jumping from the flock of ravens into Coldhands, or like somehow doing both? You know what I mean? Like, that's possible.
100%. Because we see Bran.
And Bran's a warg.
Right.
He wargs
Bran,
into Hodor.
right. But I will say that is also kind of the difference. It's tough. I think that's one of the things that makes Bran different from Bloodraven.
Yeah.
Because we don't know that Bloodraven can warg. And in fact, I would actually argue that Bloodraven can't warg.
Okay.
Unless he's warging into those ravens.
Well, who's to say that whenever you get taken into the werewood, that isn't like part
that's
of
part of
the
the
package
part of
deal?
the yeah, I know exactly. You have to kind of separate the magic, because I think that's the thing that makes Bran so special is that
Yeah.
Bran is a green seer and a warg. I think that's one of the things that probably makes him appear to be like, even I think will make him to be like better than Bloodraven.
Yeah.
Is that Bran also has this power just because of the nature of everything. I feel like that's kind of the thing, and it could be the tree itself, because what we see of Brandon Rivers in the cave seems like, maybe he is being controlled by the tree and not the other way around.
Right. And
right.
that's been a big discussion, is like, Three-Eyed Crow to Bloodraven, the Raven, everything's up for grabs. I'm of the opinion that there's multiple entities vying for control of this timeline. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. We talk about this a little bit in the Patreon episode, but all of it is very much present here, and none of it becomes any clearer in this chapter because Samwell is praying and hoping, but there's references to all different types of gods. And the interesting thing is that whenever he finishes his prayer, you have a white in front of you. So who's to say that the great other isn't some sort of entity, or they're being driven by an entity, some sort of cosmic horror thing, right? But you get the ravens, right? You end up getting a white there, and then you end up getting Coldhands. Now, just because and I'm going to completely contradict myself, but Coldhands, who's to say that Coldhands isn't being controlled by somebody else as well? But at the time, is just willing to work with Bloodraven in these ravens. Like I don't know. There's just so many things to consider, and none of it gets any clearer. And this is why George's work is so fun to talk about, because he gives you like some more evidence, but the evidence points to many different directions. So maybe gods were hearing Sam's prayers, and all of them showed up.